This is Larry D'Amico from the Chappaqua Library. And this week we're doing Ruth Asawa, a retrospective, which is coming to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It had a summer-long stay out in San Francisco, which is fitting since she spent most of her life in that city and contributed mightily to the public art in that town. Uh, and if you've ever been to San Francisco and been to Ghirardelli Square, there's the Mermaid Fountain is her piece. Um, but we're going to get a much more intimate look at her work today. Um, so, uh, in her work, she has woven together the elements of her life. Basically, um, she's was known mainly for her large scale crocheted wire sculptures. And there it's this kind of looped wire as you see her working on it. And that's how she worked on them in her living space, basically. Um, she had a studio later on in life, but for the most part, she worked on it kind of in their living room. So she was an American modernist, known primarily for the abstract loops wire sculptures inspired by nature and organic forms. In addition to the three-dimensional work, she created an extensive body of works on paper, including abstract and figurative drawings, prints influenced by nature, particularly flowers and plants, and her immediate surroundings. Um, she was constantly drawing. She drew every day. That was part of her practice, and encouraged that in her children too. Um, so before I get on to her bio, I'll come back to that and talk more in depth about her where she comes from, what her family was about, and all that. But what I want to do this time is look at her work a little bit first. This installation view is part of the retrospective that was in San Francisco. I don't know if it's going to be exactly the same in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, but as a child on the farm, we used to make patterns in the dirt, hanging our feet off the horse-drawn farm equipment. We made endless hourglass figures as I now see it, as the forms within forms of my crocheted wire sculpture. So she grew up on a farm. Her parents were immigrants and were what they call truck farmers back then. But I'll go into more depth on this as we roll along. But you see the interaction of these shapes. Each piece is really fascinating, and the inside and the outside, the openness to the air flowing through it. Um, you think of sculpture for the most part as something solid, but hers are like a line drawing with a single wire that crochets these things together. Oh, okay. Um, I'm not so interested in the expression of something. I'm more interested in what the material can do. So that's why I keep exploring. So this piece is probably the second um, uh, copper wire basket that she made. Um, Now you can see this meander that's off to the right. One of her drawings um, from Black Mountain, and I'm going to talk more about Black Mountain College later on in the talk. But basically, she was doing these kind of meanders with drawing before she started to put it into the wires and loop those together. So this is relatively small. I mean, it's 4 by 7 by 8 inches. And here's another image of another one of her baskets filled with eggs this time. It's a Ruth Asawa basket, and the photograph was done by Imogen Cunningham, who basically befriended. She was much older. She was in her 60s when she met Ruth Asawa, who was in her 30s when they moved to San Francisco. But Cunningham is a very well known photographer. Did a lot of dancers and very well known people. Frida Kahlo. There's a great portrait that she did of her, but she's an award winning, worth looking up. Actually, her photography, fabulous. Um, okay. So supposedly, um, she began doing these baskets after a trip to Mexico and saw these kind of egg baskets that were being made. Um, though there is question about this at this point. Um, Not so sure that it quite is the myth that it's made out to be. Um, and one of the things that they encouraged at Black Mountain College was to experiment with as many different types of materials as you could. So um, after making the baskets, she whoop, she began to close them and attenuate them and saw the potential for them to become larger and more interesting. Now, one of the things that she did do at Black Mountain College was she took a biology course, she took math. Black Mountain was an innovative college, and they integrated the arts, dance, poetry, um, the sciences were all advocated. Buckminster Fuller, who I'll talk more about, taught there. But Joseph and Annie Albers were the strongest influences on her. Um, but this is the source of her idea for attenuating these pieces. And basically, this in studying biology, she saw this mitosis, the duplicating of cells, and saw this attenuation before they split apart and became two. And so she was fascinated by that process. It also enters into this business of the notion that we are all made up of the same stuff on a cellular level. Um, this reproduction is kind of um, a metaphor for the fact that we're all made up of the same DNA, the same stuff. The same process goes through all of us as human beings, no matter what race or creed. As humans, this is something which is taking us. And she was very sensitive to that, and I will go into that more in when I get to the biography. Okay. And how did she make these things? Okay. So you see one of her children down below holding that dowel, and you can see this twisted wire coming off of it, and the feet and arms that you can see in the upper um, uh, right hand corner of that photograph is Ruth Asawa taking those loops that her daughter was looping around the dowel and crocheting one of her forms. So, it was integrated into her life. It was part of like, child rearing was sculpture was part of that whole process. Um, so wrapping this thing around the dowel created the coils that you see in this photograph. And this is actually another Imogen Cunningham photograph. I'll show you a larger version of it later too. So now we're going to get on to the biography. Um, so she was born in 1926, died in 2013. Um, in a small farming town called Norwalk, California. She was the fourth of seven children, grew up on a truck farm. In 1942, she was separated. The family was separated when they were sent to Japanese internment camps as a result of the isolation policies for Japanese Americans mandated by the US government. Um, so she ended up in a camp that was in Arkansas. She learned drawing in the camp from interned um, illustrators from Disney. So she actually had quite a it it was quite an advantageous situation for her. Now, one of the things from her childhood, you see a photograph of her in 1943 standing next to this bean trellis. Now, from her childhood, at a very young age, even I think they were like 4 years old when they were going out into the fields and tying up these strings for bean trellises. So along with dragging your feet in the dirt and creating these hourglass shapes, she was also tying things, tying up the trellises, tying up the twisting vines. Um, so this was something very much in her experience. She got to go to in 1943 she was able to leave the camp to attend Milwaukee State Teachers College, where she hoped to become a teacher, but was unable to complete her studies because of her Japanese ancestry and the kind of prejudice that was there. By the time she was graduating, it was 1946 or 47. No, I think it was 46, and she couldn't do her student teaching because she was a Japanese American, and there was still a lot of real hostility. Um, so she was advised by a number of different people that she should go to Black Mountain College, and she went and wanted to study with Annie Albers, who was doing fiber work. But Annie just looked at this young woman and said, no, go and study with Joseph. He been several trips with Annie and Joseph Albers to Mexico. Supposedly, that's where she learned the crocheting technique, but that's in question at this point. She really, you know, did become a critical success for a period of time in the early 50s. Um, but I'll get to that later. Um, One of the things that she said was, I hold no hostilities for what happened. I blame no one. Sometimes good comes through adversity. I would not be who I am today had it not been for the internment. And I like who I am. So, her learning from those illustration, those the basically the Disney fellows really moved her along. She had learned calligraphy in her childhood. Her mother sent her and her sisters to learn calligraphy, so she already had some familiarity with brushwork. Um, and let's see. Oh, in Arkansas, this is actually one of the only watercolors I could find that survived from 1943. And up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see some of her calligraphy. Um, so this is Ruth drawing in the internment camp. And there's the quote that I just quoted you. Okay. So um, she went off to Black Mountain and was studying with Joseph Albers, who encouraged his students to improvise, use all kinds of anything you could find. You know, I studied drawing and painting, and we were encouraged to use whatever we could find. Since we didn't have anything to work with, we worked with leaves, which were plentiful in North Carolina. The wild leaves, the dogwood leaves turned brilliant red when the frost came. And you see one of her paintings, collage pieces in the upper left, and folded paper. Now, again, she learned origami when she was a child in the camp. Um, and so folded paper came naturally to her, and um, Albers actually did a lot of folded paper projects with his students. Um, we were so poor um, that we were taking materials that were around us and using leaves and rocks and things that were natural rather than good paper and good materials that we bought. Let's see. Okay. So at at as I said, at Black Mountain, there was the integration of poetry and dance and um, literature along with the visual arts. And Merce Cunningham was there. It was really a cutting edge school. Her fellow students, Robert Rauschenberg, Cy Twombly, and an array of people that have become very, very well known. One of the things about the Albers, um, they were both um, fundamentally um, trained at the Bauhaus. So they brought that sense of the integration of the arts and technology to the table. Um, and one of the other things I wanted to talk a little bit about is this business of the organic forms. Now, this has been going on in abstraction since the early part of the 20th century. Jean Arp, um, um, people like Miro, um, uh, Paul Klee, um, and in America in the 40s there were people like Arshil Gorky, even de Kooning in the early 40s started out taking his cue from Gorky and was using more organic shapes by this time. And he was actually at Black Mountain at that point too. And so was Elaine de Kooning. Um, uh, he was into his more gestural abstraction, but the 40s he was still, nodding his head to Picasso and to Gorky. So this was quite a exciting philosophical um, brew that she had dropped into in Black Mountain. So you see these forms in these paintings, and she was correlating them to dance movement, to shapes inside of dancers. Cunningham's dance form, if you're not familiar with it, is more about shape relationship than it is about a narrative story. Very abstract dance. And here are a couple of examples of Joseph Alber's work. Um, our way of learning is doing, our point of departure, the material, our concern, ourself, our goal, imagination. So quite an atmosphere. Um, the Black Mountain College, this laundry stamp that you see. I wish I had the. Mm, I'm not seeing um, my tool to zoom in at this point, so I can't zoom in on this to show you the actual initials, but that little stamp that makes up that what looks like a weaving up above is just a sheet of fabric that's rubber stamped with the BMC laundry stamp on it. Um, and on the lower, let's see if I can do this. Do we see it? Let's see. Where is, uh, I'm not seeing it. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, um, this is a weaving by Annie Albers, so you can see how influential um, the thinking was at the time. These kind of repeat patterns, these idea notions of texture of the material being the the subject. And here is a meander in green, orange, and brown. Um, and then you see her off to the left. Now, this is a much later picture. She's already onto her larger scale wire sculptures. But as I said, she was constantly drawing. Buckminster Fuller was there, and you can see in this the structural, the logarithm that she takes advantage of and uses in her crocheted sculptures. Again, this business of the golden mean of that underlying structure in nature as the source for the creation of these pieces. And here we have one of her first wire baskets. Actually, I think that is her first wire basket, but that's okay. Actually don't do well if they're not hung. They bend. Um, so again, we're back to that original 16-inch, two-lobed, continuous form that she got from looking at the biology, the mitosis business, and then she just extended that out into this nine-lobed, single-layered, continuous form. So this business of inside and outside, a single strand, like a line drawing, is actually what makes these pieces. So she's so this piece is 117. The piece on the left is 117 inches by 16 and by 16. And here's a close-up of that piece. And you can see the intricacy. Interior and exterior. So this multi-layered form in the one on the right, um, where you can see that she's weaving forms inside of forms now, and how exactly she did that. She may have revealed to some of her children, but she was pretty close-lipped about how she managed to do this aspect of this. And then, that was 1955. Moving along here, 1959, um, you see this hanging single section reversible open window form. Um, you know, it's still a single line, like a line drawing, with these positive and negative shapes, um, kind of floating sea creature or protozoa. Um, Quite elegant. And again, constantly drawing. This is the drawing on the left is from 1964. Um, and she would draw whoever was there, um, her children, friends, um, you know, a bouquet, some fruits and vegetables. This plane tree, this is, I believe it's plane tree number 12. So there's a whole series of these pieces. And this one's a lithograph, but she did them in calligraphic ink also. But you can see how this mind is constantly moving and constantly taking things in. Um, Not this macho abstract expressionist business, but very sensitive, very subtle work. And here she is with with her spools spread out before her, um, and a room full of her pieces. It this must have been a gallery show or one corner of their living space. I'm not sure which, but this again is an Imogen Cunningham shot, the photograph. Ah, and as I said, she did make a splash in the New York art scene. She had a show at a gallery called Peridot, who was showing very reputable people, you know, at the time. Many of the who's who of the New York art scene were showing there. And she got mixed reviews. Some of the critics really loved her work. Others criticized it as uh, kind of craft oriented, too feminine, not art, but craft. Um, this particular piece was from 1963. She'd taken to creating these pieces out of hundreds and hundreds of these wires twisted together, and then opening them out into those branches, and then separating them out more and separating them out again. Very, you know, fastidious kind of repetitive action, very meditative work. And on the left is some Noguchi's. This is actually a a set piece for a Martha Graham dance piece, but I looked at it and looked at the wire thing and thought, oh, these guys have something to do with each other. Well, Noguchi, if you're familiar with Noguchi's work, it was very organic. It was very much organic shapes, and his light pieces have very much to do with forms that are very similar to Asawa's work. Uh, I don't know if they had contact with one another. Um, Noguchi made a very different choice. Now, um, where Ruth was getting some critical acclaim for her New York shows, the she had married an architect. I believe his name was Paul Lanier. I could be wrong about that. Let me look. Let me check my check my notes here. But anyway, he was an architect that she met at Black Mountain College, and they married. And um, she basically made the decision that she was going to they were going to set up house in San Francisco, and trying to deal with a career in New York and a life with what turned out to be six children was not exactly something that she chose to do. Um, Not that she ever stopped creating, but she made the choice to not pursue the career where Noguchi fostered his career, remained unmarried, though he had many affairs, really focused his energy on pushing his career forward. And again, here is a piece using screen tone on mat board that kind of imitated or um, drew inspiration from the forms of her sculpture. These these driplets, these protozoa swimming in space, um, these cellular transformations. And again, the choice to live in San Francisco with her family, but never stop working. Um, the Her children were well attended. If someone needed a sandwich, she'd stop doing what she was doing with the sculpture, get up and make that sandwich. Or if something else drew her away, one of the reasons that she loved this process was this looping business was not like painting where you have an idea and you need to carry it out. She could always pick it up again and keep going with this idea. So she had a very full life. And okay, when you put a seed in the ground, it doesn't stop growing after 8 hours. It keeps growing every minute that it's in the earth. We too need to keep growing every moment of every day that we are on this earth. And this is again a photograph by Imogen. When Ruth Asawa brought her children to public school, she saw that there was a lot to be desired in the art programming that was going on in the schools. So she began first with after school programming and creating with children using paper, using folded paper, using wire, using all kinds of different things, drawing constantly with the children. So she actually began um, an after school program with several other artists who had children in the school, and they all worked together. This grew into what became um, uh, the San Francisco, what are they calling it? Let's see. Um, San Francisco School of the Arts. It is now renamed the Ruth Asawa San Francisco School of the Arts. Um, so her work, with children, her work in education, all came home. Uh, and here is a drawing of one of her sons on a blanket. At Mobius strip. Um, let's see. Oh yeah, I wanted to say Paul became an artist um, working with her in the 60s in the school system. Um, he's actually continued to be an artist. Her daughters actually help with um, the Ruth Asawa, I believe it's Ruth Asawa Foundation or something like that. They actually um, look after her work. Now, she produced God thousands and thousands of drawings, and I don't know how many paintings. There are 300 works in the show that's coming to the Museum of Modern Art. So again, this is from the Joseph and Annie Albers Foundation. This piece is in their collection. Um, and and again, drawing every day. Um, talk on Ruth Asawa in 2023 from the show that was at the Whitney, which is called Throughline. And that was quite a wonderful show, also. So she's constantly looking for patterns. And this is a shot from that show. I'm not sure if this set of watermelons will be in the show at the Museum of Modern Art, but I took this shot when I was there. And it's fascinating to see her looking for these kind of organic shapes in nature. Uh, Again, if you have any questions, put them in the chat because I'll just keep rolling along. Ah, and again, this twisted wire piece, it starts with this very thick grouped of group of wires twisted together. And then as it branches out, they get thinner and thinner and unfurl until the smaller branches. And then, notice this cast shadow. That's one of the things about these sculptures is the lighting casts these amazing shadows and on the walls and on the floors and things like that. So again, you know, um, what is positive and negative space? What's shadow and what's substance? How do you weave through this space? It's fascinating, beautiful work. And back to this essential kind of logarithmic form, this structure as an underlying um, observation in nature, and she uses that as the structure for these pieces. Uh, this is a negative print from one of Asawa's pieces on the floor. Um, Again, Cunningham and Asawa remained friends from the 50s till Imogen Cunningham died in 1977. So, um, and here we have on permanent display in the Young Museum in I can't remember what they call this. It's a tower that was built in the I believe it was in the 80s, and she was very much behind advocating for this expansion and having a modern wing on what was a fabulous Asian collection in the De Young Museum, but not much as far as modern art because they do have San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, but the De Young now has this wing that they do um, modern exhibitions in. So, desert flower. She was given this flower by a friend, and she couldn't figure out how to draw it. She tried to draw it several times and got befuddled. So she created this wire sculpture in order to understand how this flower actually worked. And this became a whole series of lithographs and drawings that she did after she created this three-dimensional model of it, and did many of them. By the piece on the left is one of the few pieces that is a cast piece. She did do cast pieces that were public art pieces, and she's there's at least half a dozen, if not more. There's probably a dozen pieces throughout San Francisco of Ruth Asawa's public art works, some of which she collaborated with children. Um, Many of them were her solo projects. Um, but I believe by the 80s, by the late 80s, she actually got ill. I think it was, you know, probably the night when she actually started to kind of lose her energy. Um, but on the right, you see, you know, what we're going to get to see in this installation at the Museum of Modern Art. This was from the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, but and this is her um, a an installation in the show. I'm gonna I found my thing, and this photograph is actually a large blow up of Imogen Cunningham shot of their living room. So it was a big, expansive space. I'm sure that her husband created this. Um, and this was an installation at the 2022 Venice Biennale. So an acknowledgement of and the growing fame of her work. Now, you know, she passed away in 2013, but her work has been picked up by uh, Swerner Gallery in New York, who is, you know, one of those guys who really gets people's work well placed. And as she became weaker and couldn't really, you know, do the wire sculpture anymore, this was from 1991, she continued to do these wonderful drawings, these really sensitive line drawings. Um, and many of these will be in this show also. but back and forth, the speed with which she could do one of these line drawings as opposed to what it took to do one of the wire pieces is, it's understandable that she would want to do something that was much more spontaneous and direct and fed her creatively. And the these drawings would kind of just spill out of her, and they spilled right out onto the other page in this case. You could say she put herself in her work. Here's a shot again by Cunningham from the 50s. And this beautiful watercolor. Um, this was in the other show. I hope they have it in the show that's going to be at the Museum of Modern Art, but it just is a really lovely, sensitive wash drawing. Incredible colorist too. Just her sensibility is so lovely. So this show is opening on October 19th and running into 2026. Um, so that's my story on this. If you have any questions, please ask. Um, so if not, um, I will see you in 2 weeks. We'll be um, looking at Klaus Oldenburg and several other people that did massive public art projects. So until next time, bye.